It had been a long day at City Hall, filled with back-to-back meetings and pressing decisions he was looking forward. A racist police officer pulls over a black man for no reason after he arrests the man. He realizes he has just arrested Marcus Jones, tapped his fingers rhythmically on the steering wheel. His first instinct was to pull over safely and check his rearview mirror, where he saw the police cruiser parked behind him. He had not been speeding or breaking any laws. Peaceful evening at home as he approached the intersection of Maple and Oak. The blaring flash of blue and red lights pierced his twilight. Marcus's heart sank. His fingers gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. The officer inside ready to leave, Marcus took a deep breath. Burly man in his mid-30s stepped out of the car and approached with a determined stride. To the side of the road, the gravel crunching softly under his tires, the cruiser's engine hummed. Marcus rolled down his window, perfectly pressed, and his badge glinted in the last of the light. The officer reached his car. "Good evening." Marcus said, his voice steady. "Evening." The officer replied curtly, leaning slightly into the window. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Marcus Fred's brow. "I haven't done." Marcus handed over the paperwork, trying to keep his composure. "Anything wrong?" The officer's eyes narrowed as he peered into the car, his tone sharp and dismissive. "Well, I'm going to need to see your license and registration." Marcus handed over. Marcus looked at the empty streets around them, feeling a growing sense of unease. "I don't recall crossing the center line. I have been driving this route for years, without incident." "Suspicion. I noticed you were driving a bit too close to the center line. I am just making sure everything's in order." Marcus responded, "It's been a long day. I just want to get back." The officer's demeanor hardened. "You seem a bit too relaxed for someone who's been driving a bit too close to the center line." Marcus tapped the papers against his palm and studied Marcus with a steely gaze. "Where are you headed?" "Home," Marcus answered. Marcus's pulse raced. "Let's see if there is anything more we should be worried about." His face. "I am only trying to comply with your request. I am not sure why this is becoming such a problem without notice." The officer's tone got more accusatory. "Well," Marcus unbuckled his seat belt and stepped out of the car. The officer started to search the vehicle, his movements methodical but loaded with a clear sense of hostility. Marcus watched from the curb, feeling a mix of really necessary. "I haven't broken any laws." The officer's expression remained stern. Frustration and anxiety. "Let me tell you, there is nothing illegal in the car." The officer searched. "We will see about that." Minutes passed as Marcus observed a few passing pedestrians, staring inquisitively, their expressions changing from curiosity to concern. Finally, the officer straightened up and faced Marcus, a smile playing on his lips. "Well, everything seems to be in order, but I still dislike the way you're handling this." Marcus tried to keep his voice calm. "I don't understand what's happening." "Here, can I please go now?" The officer ignored the question. "You're not going now." Marcus felt a can of anxiety tighten in his stomach. "I'm not sure why this is happening. I haven't done anything wrong." The officer's gaze was unwavering. "Just sit tight. I will be back with your results." Marcus stood by the roadside, his mind racing. He glanced. Marcus took a deep breath and tried to cool his racing thoughts. The night was settling in around them, and the quiet of Cedarville. At his watch, noting the time, he was already running late. What should have been a routine drive home had turned into an unsettling encounter, leaving him with a growing sense of unease. Seemed to contrast sharply with the tension that had suddenly erupted. Marcus stood on the side of the road, the chill of the evening air seeping through his coat. The officer's cruiser was parked with its light still flashing, casting a pulsing blue glow over the quiet street. Marcus changed his weight from one foot to the other, trying to keep his anxiety. Marcus's frustration grew as he glanced around, noting the few passers-by who would stop to see the scene develop. Their expressions were a mix of "in check." The officer Reynolds was seated in his car, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights. Spoke into the radio, The minutes ticked by slowly. Curiosity and concern, but none ventured near. After what felt like an eternity, Reynolds emerged from his cruiser and walked back towards Marcus holding a clipboard. His face was set in a tight frown, and his eyes bore into Marcus with an unsettling intensity. "All right," Reynolds said, flipping through the papers on the clipboard. "I'm going to need to check your trunk." Marcus's patience was wearing thin. "I have already told you there is nothing illegal in the car. This feels excessive." Reynolds' eyes narrowed. "It's standard procedure now." Opened the trunk and lifted it open. Inside were a few bags of groceries. "Anything else in here I should know about?" Reynolds questioned, his tone dripping with contempt. Marcus groaned. "No, just groceries and personal belongings." I should know about Reynolds. A gym bag, nothing out of the norm. I should ask him to kindly go home now instead of reacting. Reynolds kept looking at the trunk with an air of superiority. He seemed to take his time, as if looking for something to justify the stop. Marcus watched, becoming more frustrated as Reynolds' behavior grew more intrusive. "Long enough," Marcus said, voice rising. "I'm not sure why I'm being treated like this. I have been courteous and helpful." Reynolds closed the trunk with a bang, turning to face Marcus with a smug grin. "All right, now that we are done with the vehicle, I need to verify." Marcus's eyes widened. "Verify." Marcus felt a knot of anxiety settle in his stomach. A few minutes later, Reynolds looked up from his phone. "My information. What exactly are you looking for?" Reynolds didn't answer directly. Instead, he pulled out his phone and started typing fiercely. The air between them crackled with tension. "Reading, I'm going to give you a citation for what?" Marcus questioned, disbelief clear in his voice. "I haven't committed any laws. Your record check came up with some irregularities." Reynolds stated, his voice empty of compassion, simply a precaution. Marcus attempted. Reynolds disregarded Marcus's objection and started filling out a citation. The process appeared to drag on, each minute extending. I could keep cool, but his displeasure was evident. "I don't know why this is happening." Longer than the last, Marcus felt a mix of anger and helplessness as he watched Reynolds work with a deliberate slowness. Finally, Reynolds handed Marcus the citation. His demeanor is still stern. "You need to sign this." Marcus looked at the paper, his eyes scanning the alleged scrawl of legal jargon. "I don't agree with this." Marcus took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. "Thank you. I hope this issue can be resolved quickly." Reynolds responded, turning on his heels and headed back to his cruiser. "You will get a court date in the mail until then." Marcus watched him go, feeling a great weight of injustice to settle over him. He climbed back into his car, the evening's chill sinking into his bones as he drove away. Marcus glanced at the citation in his hands, a mixture of anger and resignation bubbling inside him. The peaceful evening he had anticipated was replaced by an unsettling encounter. Left Marcus wondering the fairness of the system. He had always trusted the drive to the Cedarville police precinct felt endless. Marcus's mind raced with a jumble of ideas, his frustration mounting with each passing minute. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting fleeting shadows that danced across his. When Marcus arrived at the precinct, he was met with the strong glow of fluorescent lights and the bustling activity of the police officers inside. Marcus, still handcuffed, was led through the door by Officer Reynolds, whose stern expression hadn't softened since the traffic stop inside the... Marcus's pulse hammered as he was brought past the reception counter and into the booking area. Why am I being treated like this? The mood was a sharp contrast to the calm street. The racket of phones was ringing. The murmur of conversations and the clatter of keyboards filled the room. Marcus's heart pounded. Marcus asked, his voice strained. Reynolds not answered, instead pointed Marcus to a metal bench close to the booking counter. Marcus sat down, his hands still restrained behind his back, and looked around at the busy officials and clerks trying to ignore the stares of curiosity and occasional frowns from the staff. The officer's eyebrows wrinkled, "Oh, illegal activity for what discrepancies on his record," Reynolds said. A female officer approached her face, a mask of professionalism. She suspected illegal activity. "We are just processing Marcus for now." Marcus Jones responded, "I'm the mayor of Cedarville." The booking officer paused, her expression from professional to surprised. "You're the mayor?" Marcus nodded, his frustration evident. "Yes, I don't see how that changes." Her eyes softened with a hint of pity. "Anything, but I need to know why I'm being detained." The booking officer turned to Reynolds, confusion and concern. Why wasn't this information verified before bringing him in? Reynolds' face hardened. It was just a routine stop. We had to follow procedure. The booking agent sighed, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. She worked Reynolds away to make a call. Marcus could hear the murmur of conversation and the occasional clatter of paperwork. The tension in the room was palpable, and Marcus's frustration mounted. As he waited, after several minutes, the booking agent returned with a small stack of papers. "I have to confirm his identity and get this sorted out." "Confirmed your identity, Mr. Jones." "I'm afraid Officer Reynolds' actions were not appropriate." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "So what happens now?" The booking officer sighed. "We will need to release you, and I'll make sure that situation is reported." As the officer removed the handcuffs, Marcus rubbed his wrists, felt the sting of the metal. He stood up. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to relax. "I want to know why this happened. This was an abuse of power." Reynolds' gaze remained cold. "You will have to take that up with the department." Reynolds returned, his face a mix of defiance and annoyance. Marcus turned on his heel and headed toward the exit, his irritation clear in every step as he left the precinct. The buzz of activity continued unabated. The night air was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the heated emotions Marcus felt he could hear behind him. Marcus knew the lights of Cedarville blurred past him as he drove home. The peaceful evening he had hoped for had been shattered by an unfair encounter, leaving him with a great sense of betrayal and a developing determination to address the wrongs he had faced. His mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. One thing was clear. This was far from over. The Cedarville police precinct loomed large and imposing in the dim light of early evening. It was a reflection of deeper issues that needed to be addressed. The road ahead was uncertain. This was more than a simple traffic stop gone awry. Buzz with ACID. As Marcus Jones sat in the small windowless room set for interviews and briefings, the fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh, sterile glow over the plain walls and wooden table. The door to the room creaked open and Detective Mitchell entered. He was a tall man in his early years. "Mr. Jones." Mitchell started, his voice steady, but laced with an undertone of, "I understand there's been a bit of a mix-up here." "Mr. Jones." Mitchell nodded at Marcus, then took a seat across from him. His expression was a mix of concern and curiosity. "Officer Reynolds didn't give me a straight response about anything." Mitchell nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "We have been reviewing the reports and talking with witnesses. This is more than just a simple procedural error. Evident. It wasn't just a mix-up. I was stopped, searched, and detained without cause." Mitchell's door opened once more, and Officer Reynolds entered, his face wearing a mask of stubborn defiance. Glancing at Marcus, Mitchell avoided eye contact with Reynolds, and the tense atmosphere in the room descended. Mitchell's seat was next to Reynolds's. "I pulled Mr. Jones over because he was driving too near the center line. I followed standard procedure in conducting a search and checking his records." Marcus interjected, his voice rising, standard procedure in expressing from professional to stern. "Officer Reynolds, could you explain your actions?" Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "I pulled Mr. Jones over." Mitchell's eyes flicked between Marcus and Reynolds. "You understand, Officer Reynolds, that this isn't just about the traffic stop. There are allegations of racial bias and misconduct. We need to understand why you acted the way you did." Reynolds' face was compliant and polite. "Hardened. I did what I thought was necessary to ensure there was no illegal activity If there was an issue with my methods, then that's something the department will have to handle. Mitchell's gaze was steady. We're handling it now. Mr. Jones's identity was verified, and it's clear that his treatment was unwarranted. I need you to explain why you proceeded with an arrest when there was no legal justification. Reynolds' expression remained resolute. I was doing my job. If Mr. Jones had nothing to hide, then he wouldn't have been upset. Marcus's frustration boiled over. I was upset because I was being treated unfairly. This is not just about me. It's about how you treat everyone, Mitchell. Reynolds stood up, his face a mixture of anger and defiance. This is ridiculous. I was just following the rules. Mitchell's voice was firm. You are suspended pending further investigation. We will review your actions and decide on suitable disciplinary measures. Rules are there to protect everyone, not to be used as a tool for bias and misconduct. Reynolds left the room. Marcus looked at Mitchell, his frustration tempered by a glimmer of hope. What happens now? Mitchell's expression softened slightly. We will investigate thoroughly. Marcus nodded, feeling a mix of relief and tiredness. I appreciate that. I just hope this leads to real change. Mitchell stood up, extending a hand. Your experience will be used to address the shortcomings in our procedures and ensure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. Sure it does. Thank you for your patience and cooperation. Marcus shook Mitchell's hand, feeling the weight of the evening events slowly lifting as he left the precinct. The night air felt cooler, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere inside. The experience had been unsettling, but it had also brought clarity to the issues that needed. Marcus was resolved to see it through the lights of Cedarville passed by in a blur, even if the events had revealed serious flaws in the system and presented a road forward. Marcus's thoughts were a whirl of emotions the night's events had exposed, reminder of the work ahead and the hope for a better, more just future. The sun rose over Cedarville with an unexpected warmth, a stark contrast to the turmoil Marcus Jones had faced the previous night. The town hall was a stately building, pointing its red brick facade and large windows, reflecting the early light. Marcus arrived at the town hall, his face a mask of determination. The weight of his recent experience was heavy, but his resolve to address the injustices and work towards meaningful change kept him moving forward. Inside, the atmosphere was a mix of the usual administrative bustle. Marcus. Events head on. Carla nodded her concern. I had set a meeting with the police chief and city council members. Marcus entered his office, a spacious room full of light and orderly furniture. The room served as a haven from the turmoil of the outside world. But today, it felt like a battleground, where important decisions would be taken a few minutes later. Marcus entered the conference room where Chief Anderson and several city council members were already gathered. The room was set with a big table in the middle, and everyone was seated ready for the debate. Chief Anderson, a seasoned officer with a calm but commanding presence, looked up as Marcus entered. Good morning, Chief, Marcus said, shaking hands with Anderson. Thank you for meeting with me on short notice. Chief Anderson nodded. Good morning, Mayor. We're here to discuss last night's events and how to move forward. Marcus took a seat at the head of the table, his posture straight and his attitude resolute. Last night's actions were not only inappropriate but also suggestive of a more general issue within our police force. Council member Davis, a middle-aged man known for his direct approach, spoke up. We have all seen the reports. This is not just about one officer's misbehavior. Marcus nodded in agreement. Exactly. It's necessary that we take a comprehensive approach to address these issues. We need to review our procedures, ensure proper training, and most importantly, rebuild the confidence between the police and the community chief. Marcus looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every council member. What kind of changes are we looking at, Chief Anderson? Anderson leaned forward, his expression serious. We're committed to addressing these problems. We've already started an internal review, but we need your support to implement lasting changes. Marcus took a deep breath. First, we need to. This means changing our disciplinary policies and guaranteeing openness in how we handle complaints. We also have to make investments in training programs that target issues of bias and enhance community relations. Councilmember Garcia, a young woman with a reputation for supporting social justice, added, we should also take into account establishing a civilian oversight board. This board would provide an extra degree of responsibility and guarantee that community concerns are heard and addressed. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. A civilian oversight board could be a major step forward it would give. Chief Anderson agreed. A board like that would need to be carefully structured to ensure effectiveness and justice. We would need to define its powers and responsibilities clearly. Councilmember Davis looked at Marcus. How do you propose we move? The community a voice in supervising the police department's activities. Help restore trust. Marcus forward with these changes. Marcus took a moment to gather his ideas. We should also create a proposal outlining these reforms. We should also hold public forums to gather input from the community. It's imperative that the people of Cedarville participate in this process. Chief Anderson nodded. That is a good approach. Engaging the community will be essential in ensuring these changes are effective and have broad support. The debate continued with specifics about the proposed reforms being discussed. Were debates about the specifics of the Oversight Board, the scope of the training programs, and the mechanisms for ensuring accountability. Despite the challenges, there was a clear. Among those present as the conference drew to an end, Marcus felt a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but the commitment of the police chief and the city council members to address the issues was a crucial first step. The support of the community and the dedication to meaningful reform would drive the change required to restore trust and guarantee. Justice Marcus exited the meeting room, the weight of the events of the previous night eased by the feeling of progress. The road to change was only starting, but for the first time there was a clear direction and a group effort to target the. Marcus was resolved to see it through for the benefit of Cedarville and its community. Issues head-on as he walked through the hallways of the town hall, felt the early morning light on his face, a reminder of the new beginnings and the possibility for positive change the road ahead would demand. But when Marcus Jones arrived for the public forum, the main auditorium was packed. The room buzzed with the energy of worried local activists and community leaders, all gathered to discuss the recent events and the suggested police department reforms. Marcus could feel the general tension and expectation as. The auditorium was a big space with high ceilings and rows of chairs that stretched from the front to the rear, all facing a makeshift stage. The stage was equipped with a podium and a few chairs for the panelists. Chief Anderson, a representative, walked through the audience headed toward the stage. Marcus took a deep breath from the Civilian Oversight Board and ZB and many city council members. He moved up to the platform, gazing out at the sea of faces. The crowd calmed as he started to talk, his voice carrying a mix of authority and empathy. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I know that many of you are greatly concerned about the recent incident involving the police and the consequent issues of trust and accountability. I want to assure you that we are taking these concerns seriously and are committed to address them. Marcus continued tonight. We are here to discuss the proposed reforms and hear your opinions and suggestions. Chief Anderson stepped up to the microphone, his presence commanding attention. We want this process to be transparent and inclusive, and your input is crucial. Murmur of approval swept over the crowd. Our aim is to guarantee that such events are handled properly and that we restore the confidence between the police and by means of reform, including adjustments to our disciplinary processes, upgrades to officer training, and the establishment of a civilian oversight board. After Chief Anderson finished the floor, the audience consisted in a mix of inquisitive, hopeful, and doubtful faces. One by one, citizens stood up to share their thoughts and experiences. so reflecting the great investment the community has in the issue. First, a young woman named Lisa, who is well known for her activism, took the mic. I have seen how skewed policies have affected our community. Thus, it is imperative that the Civilian Oversight Board have actual authority, and isn't only a symbolic gesture to guarantee that the board can properly hold officers responsible. Marcus nodded, appreciating her worries. Thank you, Lisa. We know that the Oversight Board has significant authority. We are working on defining its powers to make sure it can have a real impact. A middle-aged man named Tom, who had been Cedarville's resident for decades, spoke next. I have lived in this town my entire life, and this is the first time I have seen the police and the community come together like this. It's a step in the right direction, but we must make sure the reforms are carried out successfully and that they solve the underlying causes of these problems. Marcus addressed Tom's comment. I value your perspective. Implementation is key, and we are dedicated to implementing these reforms with responsibility and diligence. Over the evening, different community members expressed their opinions, ranging from support to criticism. The dialogue was open and passionate, reflecting the deep-seated issues and the hope for real change. Marcus was struck as the forum developed by the recurring themes in the comments: the need of openness, responsibility, and meaningful community involvement. The public's involvement was a potent reminder of the shared desire for reform and justice. Toward the end of the forum, a local pastor, Reverend Johnson, spoke with a calm and measured tone. We all want a safer and more just Cedarville. It's important that we approach these reforms with unity and an understanding that true change takes time. Let's support each other and work together to make this town a better place for everyone. Marcus felt a surge of hope as he listened to Reverend Shan Johnson's words. The evening had been emotional and strong, but it was evident that the community was committed to change. The dialogue had given insightful analysis and confirmed the group will to solve the current problem. As the forum concluded, Marcus left the stage feeling a mix of relief and resolve. The evening had been evidence of the community's resiliency and commitment to justice. The work ahead would be difficult, but the success of the reforms. Walking out of the auditorium, Marcus looked back at the room now filled with the quiet hum of was greatly dependent on the participation and support of the citizens of Cedarville. Marcus was determined in his commitment to seeing it through. As he entered the cool night air, he felt the discussions had laid the groundwork for the changes needed to rebuild trust and ensure accountability. The road to reform was still long. Marcus Jones walked across the town hall, the community he served, the sun barely rising above Cedarville. The public forum from the previous evening had set a clear path forward, and today marked the beginning of putting those plans into action. Today marked the beginning of putting those plans into effect. Carla greeted him as he entered, her tone bright. Despite the early hour, I have. The office hummed with activity. Carla was already at her desk sorting through a stack of documents. Marcus nodded and took a few notes on the reform initiatives. Marcus nodded. Carla handed him a folder including the most recent versions of the reform proposals, together with a list of important action items. She sat at his desk. Morning, and let's go over everything. I want to make sure we're ready to hit the ground running. Marcus turned through the papers, noting the thorough plans for the Oversight Board and the training programs. The proposals were comprehensive, addressing many of the community's concerns from the forum. Still, he knew that implementation would. Training programs. The police department has also sent over their initial feedback. Marcus flipped through the documents. Marcus said, scanning the pages, I want to understand their perspective before we move forward. Carla nodded, tapping a few keys on her computer to bring up the relevant reports. Here's the feedback from Chief. Let's start by carefully monitoring and committed from all involved. Anderson and his team have expressed some reservations regarding the suggested schedule and the logistics of the training programs Marcus examined. Marcus carefully considered the comments and found that most of them related to logistical issues such the viability of the proposed training schedules and the necessity of extra resources. While these were legitimate points of view, Marcus was resolved to maintain the momentum. Marcus mentioned setting the papers aside. We will need to address these issues, but not at the expense of our timeline. Let's schedule a meeting with Chief Anderson and the training coordinators to work out the specifics. Carla Ned noted, taking notes. Later we will schedule that meeting. Marcus examined the main ideas of the reform proposal and developed his answers to the police department's issues under preparation for his meeting with Chief Anderson. He then reviewed the morning's responses to the police department. Marcus walked through the town hall. Marcus arrived to discover Chief Anderson already seated, reviewing some papers. The chief looked up. Marcus nodded to indicate good morning. Marcus felt a mix of expectation and resolve. The meeting room was set up with a large table and several chairs. Marcus. From him. Thank you for meeting with me. I want to address the comments you to and discuss how we can proceed with the implementation of the reforms. Chief Anderson nodded. Good morning, Mayor. I appreciate your willingness to work through these issues. We are committed to make these reforms effective, but there are rather practical considerations. Marcus nodded. I understand. Let's start with the concerns about the training programs. Chief Anderson reviewed his notes. The main issue is the availability of resources and trainers. The proposed schedule is quite ambitious, and we're concerned about our capacity to meet these deadlines without compromising the quality of the training. Marcus leaned forward. Considering the chief's words, we need to balance the urgency of these reforms with practical constraints. Perhaps we can also investigate options for additional resources and slightly change the timeline to prioritize key areas of training. Chief Anderson's expression softened somewhat. That could work. We also need to make sure the training covers all facets of the suggested reforms. Marcus nodded, agreed. Let's work on a revised schedule that incorporates your feedback and guarantees that the training remains, including external trainers if necessary. Marcus and Chief Anderson worked through the specifics of the revised training schedule and the logistics of implementing the Civilian Oversight Board. The conversation was constructive, with both parties concentrated on finding practical ICAL solutions to the challenges at hand. By the end of the Marcus felt a sense of progress. Thank you for your cooperation, Chief Marcus said, as the meeting came to an end. I believe we are on the correct path. Let us keep the lines of contact open as we proceed. Chief Anderson seemed more receptive and had agreed on a revised schedule to address the resource concerns. Marcus left the conference feeling a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead was still difficult, but the cooperative effort to address the issues and implement the reforms was a means of appreciation for your understanding. Marcus shook Chief Anderson's hand. Marcus passed by the busy activity of the town hall, a reminder of the community's involvement and support. The work of reform was just beginning, but the progress made in the meeting and the dedication of both the police department and the community were positive step forward. Walking back to his office, Marcus passed by. The road of reform was far from finished, but with each step, Cedarville was moving closer to a future marked by greater accountability and trust. The challenges were significant, but the road forward was clear, and Marcus was determined to sit down at his desk and review the updated papers and action items. See it for the benefit of the entire Cedarville Police Department. The training facility was humming with activity as officers gathered for the day session. The early sunlight streamed through the windows and created a brilliant glow over the room. It was an especially clear August morning. Marcus Jones arrived at the facility accompanied by Carla and a few of his staff members today, with a mix of classrooms and practical exercise areas, all designed to handle various aspects of law enforcement training. Marcus Jones came at the facility. Today was a major day, the beginning of a new comprehensive training program designed. Marcus was keen to see the changes in action and make sure the training matched the expectations of the community inside the main training room. Chief Anderson was already at front getting ready for the session. The room was set with rows of chairs, facing a large presentation screen, officers highlighted by the recent reforms. We're sitting silently waiting for the session to start. The air smelled like a combination of... Marcus moved to the front of the hall where Chief was seated, eager and curious. "Thank you for visiting us today, Marcus." Anderson greeted him with an awkward "Good morning, Mayor. We are ready to start." Grinned, excited and anxious at the same time. "Good morning, Chief. I value the chance to see." As the session started, "The training I am looking forward to watching how these new initiatives are carried out, Chief." Anderson presented the schedule for today's training, which will center on community involvement in bias awareness and updated disciplinary policies. Various guest speakers covering these subjects throughout ILI. Renowned bias training specialist Dr. Elena Martinez presented the first session, starting with an interesting. The presentation on the impacts of unconscious bias on room policing was focused, and as Dr. Martinez discussed doable tactics for identifying and overcoming prejudices in. Marcus watched intently the cops' everyday encounters. Some looked involved and serious. Some were dubious about the material, but Marcus. After Dr. Martinez's session, there was a pause for which one hoped it would inspire significant thought and change. Marcus seized the chance to talk with certain officials seeking feedback on the training. Officer Collins, a middle-aged veteran with a gruff facade, so far talked. "Since we have been doing things a particular way for a long time, it is honestly refreshing to see some new perspectives being included. Once, so it's certainly an adjustment." Marcus nodded, recognizing the difficulties of change. "I appreciate your openness. These changes are aimed to enhance our methods and re-establish trust. Your comments are thus very important in ensuring." The following session, under the guidance of a local activist, Maya, focused on community involvement, and we are headed in the correct path. Johnson offered her knowledge and observations on good law enforcement-based communication between The program featured role-playing exercises where police simulated managing many situations, stressing empathy and attentive listening. The police appeared more involved throughout my visit. Actively engaging in the role-playing and offering questions, Marcus saw a good change in the atmosphere of the room. Indication that the last session the day went on was connecting with the attendees. Legal expert Thomas Reed clarified the updated disciplinary processes. The presentation featured thorough examples of how new policies for managing complaints and guaranteeing responsibility handled the new protocols would be followed, and what officials should anticipate in terms of monitoring and repercussions by the end of. Marcus had cautious optimism about the training. It had been rigorous and thought-provoking, but it had also spurred insightful conversations and reflections among the officials as Marcus was leaving the session. Marcus asked Chief Anderson how he felt the training went. Looking thoughtful generally, though the sessions were good, believe it was useful as the officers had a lot of new knowledge to process. Acquired, will want more instruction and coaching to guarantee these ideas are entirely included into our regular routines. Marcus nodded in accord. "I'm happy to hear that we should maintain the momentum and keep supporting the officers as they change." To these modifications, once the officials left the training room, Marcus paused to consider the training day had. Although it was just the beginning of a more extensive process the dedication to change would need, it was a major step forward. Must be maintained by constant supervision. Marcus left community participation and continuous education. Of the facilities, the clean air felt rejuvenating on his skin. The events of the day had proved that even with change he may also challenge it. As he drove away from the training ground, he felt to be renewed. Though the path to change was long and full with challenges, the progress accomplished that day was great. Was a vital component of creating a brighter future for Cedarville. Marcus, dedicated to seeing the process through. making sure the changes in training will produce a more responsible and community-oriented police department as Marcus thought on the day's successes and the work left to be done as the sun started to drop over Cedarville. Though the road of reform was long, every stride the community went toward a more fair and equitable future. The days that followed the introduction of the new police training program were full with expectation and wary hope. Cedarville community was keenly observing to observe the results after actively contributing to the conversations and changes. Concrete results of Marcus Jones's felt weight of obligation as he got ready for the town's evening hall meeting, in which he would provide an update on the development and answer public questions about Town Hall. Once again, crowded with people whose faces reflected a combination of hope and mistrust, the big room was set up. Rows of seats facing a platform on which a panel of authorities included Marcus Chief Anderson and many city council. Members were eager to serve the neighborhood, and the mood was infused with urgency as the residents. Marcus replaced him on the platform, looking about the room, awaiting hard proof of the changes implemented. Saw old faces from past conferences and fresh ones whose looks combined exhaustion with eagerness as his speech held the weight of the expectations of the community. Good evening, Cedarville. Thank you for. We are here today to provide an update on the latest revisions and to get your opinions on the changes that have been made. Your participation has been very vital in this process, and we want to make sure we are headed in the correct direction. Chief Anderson got up next to Marcus, prepared to provide updates on the state of the police department. Over the last several weeks, we have started fresh training initiatives with an eye on community involvement and prejudice awareness. Revised disciplinary policies. We are dedicated to bring about significant transformation. The room was silent as. After his quick report, the floor was available for public, and Chief Anderson talked the audience attentively and seriously. Remarks the first speaker, Lisa, who had been outspoken at the last forum. The microphone, I value the efforts. Lisa started her tone measured but forceful. Yet, we must see consistent outcomes. There is particular measures or benchmarks we may use to assess the success of these changes. Ms. Marcus nodded at. Appreciating openness, Lisa, we are working on defining exact criteria to assess the general influence of the changes we do and the success of the training courses. Schedule frequent releases of reports to let the community know about our development as Lisa went back to her seat. Tom, the longtime resident who had before shown wary hope, stood up, and I'm happy to see the improvements occurring, but what about continuous community communication? How can we guarantee that comments still shapes the reform process? Marcus said we are dedicated to keeping open channels of contact. We will keep holding frequent town hall meetings and provide information via. The reform process will still heavily rely on many avenues of community input. Jordan, the next speaker, a young male, expressed worry about recent encounters with police personnel I had. Saw some encouraging developments, but there are still occasional times when I believe the cops don't entirely comprehend or value the community they serve. What actions are being done to handle this? Chief Anderson mentioned Jordan's. Knowing that developing trust takes time, our training courses are meant to solve these problems, and we constantly review and improve our methods. Hence, we support constant communication and feedback to enable us. The comments were honest and introspective, but they also maintained a mix of praise and worry with recommendations. As the conference went on, it became evident from the many points of view and experiences of the community that although progress had been achieved, Reverend Johnson, who had spoken favorably at the last forum, had much to do. Presented a hopeful view. While we have witnessed encouraging progress, let us keep cooperating to solve the process of changing outstanding challenges is one which calls for our unity and concentrated on our common objectives, and appreciated Reverend Johnson's motivating remarks. Thank you, Reverend. It is important that we remain dedicated to this process and help one another as we go. Shortly as the conference came to end, Marcus and Chief Anderson stopped to consider the evening's conversations. The community's participation was evidence of their commitment in the reform process the comments offered was useful and underlined, both the areas requiring further attention, walking out of and the progress achieved. Town Hall Marcus had a mixture of satisfaction and resolution for the communities of reaction that had been considered complete and positive, underlining the need of ongoing openness and involvement. Although reform was a long road, the town's combined effort proved a strong tool for good change. Marcus departed the town hall, the quiet streets of Cedarville mirroring the peace after a night air was cold. Busy and significant evening. The task ahead would be demanding, but with the help and commitment of Marcus in the community was sure Cedarville could keep developing toward a more fair and equal future. Marcus a renewed sense of direction as he drove throughout the town. The road of reform was far from finished, but the action done, was a step towards a better Cedarville, guided by the common dedication to justice and community.